This chapter is going to be considering the socialization process. You can think of it as how we learn about our culture and how we become a part of the social order. We'll look at a couple of theorists that help us understand how we learn about social roles and how we're socialized and how the socialization process actually makes us human. We'll also explore some of the gender messages that we learn from family, peers, and the media, and how different social institutions are the agents of the socialization process. By the end of the chapter, we'll come to understand that we are not necessarily prisoners of the socialization process, or at least if we understand the process, we can actively examine why we do certain things. Our text creates a context of understanding the socialization process through its discussion about feral and isolated children. Children that are not socialized like other children give us insight into the socialization process. These stories lend researchers to believe that while children don't naturally create language without being taught it, they do pick it up very quickly when they're exposed to it. The key to human development is language, and without language, there's no way for humans to form complex or abstract thoughts or to communicate with others. Without language, there is little to no connection to others, and without language, there can be no culture, meaning there's no shared way of life. And culture is how we learn to become people and how we learn to become part of the social world. In the 1930s, Scheels and Dye did an experiment on institutional children because children reared in orphanages tend to have low IQs. Scheels and Dye hypothesized that children might not be developing normal intelligence abilities due to the lack of stimulating environments in the orphanages. They selected 13 infants who were mentally slow and who no one wanted to adopt, and placed them in an institution for mentally retarded women. The women enjoyed caring for the infants and giving them attention, and they played with them and cuddled with them. Then the researchers left also a control group of 12 at the orphanage, where they received very little attention. 2.5 years later, Scheels and Dye tested the children's intelligence. Those cared for by the women in the institution gained an average of 28 IQ points, while those who remained in the orphanage lost 30 points. 21 years later, Scheels and Dye followed up, and the ones that were left in the orphanage had an average education of less than 3rd grade. 4 of them still lived in state institutions, while the others had very low-level jobs. The children raised by the institutionalized women had an average of 12th grade education, and 5 had completed 1 or more years of college. A study that replicated Scheels and Dye took place in Romania and split a group of over 130 children who were placed either in control or experimental groups. The control group remained in an orphanage, and the experimental group children were placed in foster care. 6 years later, the children were tested, and those placed in foster care were better adjusted socially and even had more brain cells than the control group left in the orphanage. The text also cites to the case of Jeannie, who was found severely neglected and abused with no social interaction and left alone until age 13. She was never able to make up for the lost time and never gained language or social skills. It appears that the ability to bond socially and develop social skills is dependent on early interaction with other humans. We also know that animals need a social environment to develop social skills. In a series of experiments with rhesus monkeys, psychologists Harry and Margaret Harlow demonstrated the importance of early learning. The Harlows raised baby monkeys in isolation. They gave each monkey 2 artificial mothers. One mother was only a wire frame with a wooden head, but did have a nipple from which the baby could nurse. The frame of the other mother, which had no bottle, was covered with soft terry cloth. The monkeys that had to nurse at the wire frame were never able to participate properly in a normal, social monkey type of environment. In other words, they could not play or socialize normally with other monkeys. The females could not properly raise their young and were inadequate and even brutal mothers. Some monkeys were isolated for shorter periods of time, and those were able to adjust socially. The various case studies and experiments also suggest that there are windows of opportunity where social learning needs to take place. If that window has closed, shut, in other words, if it's too late, the social learning may not take place.